Hello there, Vector Tuts. My name is Maciej Lenartowicz, and today I'm going to show you a couple of useful techniques to achieve this great-looking dumbbell icon. Well, I have no idea why you would want to use a dumbbell icon with the progress bar on it, but nevertheless, let's give it a go. So let's get started. I've gone ahead and created a new document and added a simple gray background along with a base for my icon. And this is just a very simple 512 pixels wide square with 90 pixels of rounded corner. And now if you direct your attention to the layers palette, there's a hidden shapes layer in here. I'm going to turn it down and drag it to the top of the stack. There's a number of objects here: a perfect circle, a flat ellipse, and an element connecting the latter two. I'm going to select it, and using my reflect tool, I'm going to create a copy. Now, with these two shapes selected, I'm going to shift-click the perfect circle, and using the anchor points on my ellipse, I'm going to reflect them to the other side. I'm going to alt-click the shapes layer, and using my Pathfinder palette, I'm going to merge them into one dumbbell shape. I'll give it a fill, and fill it with black. Now I'm going to center it on my page, and the primitive shape for my dumbbell is ready. Okay, I'm gonna double click the shapes layer and call it dumbbell. Now let's add a couple of highlights. So I'm gonna grab my ellipse tool and draw a circle about here. I'm going to give it a different color so just that I know what I'm doing, and I'm gonna start scaling it up until I have more or less something like this. I'm going to nudge it into position, maybe scale it up a little bit more. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, using my direct selection tool, or the white arrow, if you will, I'm going to select this bottom anchor point, and I'm going to drag it up about here. Now, in this Watches palette, there's a little gradient named highlight. I'm going to click it, and using the gradient annotator, I'm going to start resizing and moving this gradient around. So I believe this location looks about okay. Well, I can always scale down my ellipse, or at least something that used to be an ellipse, move it around, adjust these angles until I get something that looks pretty much natural. Okay, this looks quite fine. So I'm going to select this layer, this object, and I'm going to duplicate it on the other side. Now, I'm going to create one more ellipse about here, move it slightly up, and use the same technique to create a highlight in the middle. I'll just adjust my gradient a little bit more, tweak it here and tweak it there, and this is starting to look pretty much okay. It's going to be a drastic change, but yeah, this looks about okay. So there's a dumbbell with highlights. Since the dumbbell is sitting on a surface, let's add some shadow to it. So I'm going to zoom a little bit, and I'm going to grab my ellipse tool. Now I'll look for this anchor point down here, and I'm going to draw a perfect circle. I'll fill with a gradient ranging from pure black to pure black. But here I'll change the opacity to 0. I'll move it a little bit away from the edge and adjust this diamond shape. indicator about here. And I'll change the type to radial. Now I'm going to grab my scale tool and scale it down a little bit to a point where it looks organic. You can always adjust this gradient down here, and when you're satisfied with the result, you can copy it to the opposite side of the dumbbell. And there's the shadow. Alright, I'd like to add a reflection to my dumbbell right now, but before I do that, there's one tweak I like to do. Now, when I take a look at my dumbbell, I see that this middle part, that this handle, is a little bit too thin. It could actually be a lot fatter for this iconic view. So there's a very handy trick. I'm going to double click my dumbbell shape to isolate it, and now there's a very neat trick, and you can do that only when you use the scale tool. You cannot achieve this kind of effect if you're using the bounding mouse. So I'm going to grab my direct selection tool, and I'm going to marquee around this portion of my shape. And this way, I'm selecting a number of anchor points around here. All those other anchor points in my shape are not selected. Thus, they're not going to be affected by any modification that I use right now. And with this lot selected, I'm going to use my scale tool to shift scale them up. And this actually moves them away from one another and makes this section much thicker. So once you're satisfied with the look, just double click out the isolation mode and adjust your highlight. And this looks much better. Alright, now the reflection. I'm going to select my dumbbell shape, and using the reflect tool, I'm going to create a copy down here. Now I'm going to grab the rectangle tool and draw a big rectangle covering my whole dumbbell shape. I'll select it and fill it with a gradient. Now I want a simple black to gray gradient. However, I'm going to adjust this one, make it a little bit lighter. I'm also going to change its orientation so that the lighter part comes from the top. Now I'm going to shift click my dumbbell shape, and in the transparency palette I'm going to use the flyout menu to make opacity mask. Now once you're in the transparency palette, I'm going to click this icon, and using the gradient annotator, I'm going to move my gradient up, thus reducing the visibility of the reflection. Now once you're happy with the result, and this is very important, you have to click this icon to enter the object edit mode, and now you can click off the shape or reduce its opacity. I'm going to go with 60%, that's the way I like. And here's your reflection. Okay, your dumbbell icon is virtually ready, and we could actually settle here, but let's go crazy and add a progress bar. So I'm going to add a new layer and name it progress bar. I'm also going to change its color to something like orange. Now here I'm going to use my line segment tool, and I'll start looking for the center point, and I'll shift alt drag a line to about here. Now I'll give it a Y stroke and change its cap to round cap. I'll also increase its weight to about 20 points. Now with this big fat stroke, I'm going to click it, press Ctrl C and Ctrl F to create a copy of this path in the front. Now I'm going to give it another color. I'm going to reduce its width to about 14 pixels, 14 points. Now I'm going to copy it and paste it in front once again. And once again I'm going to change its color to something else. Now I'll just start scaling down to a point where I like the appearance, and about 6 or 7 points works for me. Let's settle with the middle ground, 7 points. I'm going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard and nudge the shape up and down to about this location. And those are the primitive shapes for my progress bar. The next step is to select all 3 strokes, go to Object, choose Expand, and hit OK. And this creates outlines. Now, for some mysterious reason, Illustrator will sometimes throw groups at you, and I have no idea why it happens, since there's only one object in each of those groups. However, I'm just going to press Ctrl-Shift-G to get rid of the groups, and I'm good to go. Now, I'm going to start filling those objects with gradients. And I'll start with the white shape, give it this gradient, and change its location to something like this, making sure that the lighter part is down here below. And this gives me impression that this object is pressed into the shape of the dumbbell. Okay, for this layer, I'm going to use another gradient, this time ranging from 100% opacity white to transparent white. So I'm going to reduce the opacity here to 0. And once again, using the gradient tool, I'll reposition my gradient like so. Okay, I'll reduce its opacity to about 75%, and this looks quite okay. Now, for this shape, I'm going to choose a different method. I'm going to fill it with black, but just to be sure, I'm going to switch to my HSB and make sure that all those values are zeroed out. Next, I'm going to go to Effect, Stylize, and choose Inner Glow. And here I'll start playing with my values. First of all, I'm gonna check Preview to make sure I can see what I'm doing, and maybe I'll bump up the opacity to about 40%. I'll change the blur to 2 pixels. I'll leave it at 3 actually. I'm gonna hit OK and change the blending mode of this shape to screen. And I get a nice glossy, glass-like surface. Okay, let's continue with the progress bar, but actually there's not a lot progressing in here. So let's add some color. I'm going to select this path and hit Ctrl-C and Ctrl-B, and this pastes my path in the back. Now I'm going to change its transparency to normal and fill with the color. Let's say I'll input something along the lines of 200, 50, 100. This gives me a very bright color. Now I'm going to modify my inner glow value. Well, let's say reset the opacity to about 100%, change the blending mode to multiply, and I'll look for some vibrant dark color. Of course, I'll hit Preview to make sure, take a look what I'm looking for, and let's go something more saturated yet darker, something like this. It's quite okay. Now when I'm here, I believe I'm still going to change the opacity of the screen effect to about 20%, and this is about the effect I'm going for. So now the progress bar is at its completion, it's full. So let's actually reduce it to about its 50% length. So I'm going to select my progress bar path, this blue filled path, and that's actually the third path from the top. And I'm going to get rid of about half of it. But instead of using the Pathfinder palette, drawing a rectangle on top of it, there's another quicker method. I'm going to press Shift E, and this selects my eraser tool. And now, if I just hold the Alt key and drag a marquee around this region, I'm going to delete this portion of it. So there's actually a faster way than using the Pathfinder palette. So this is my progressing or moving progress bar. Okay, we're almost done here. The last thing I like to add is a little bit of pulsing glow in here. So I'm gonna create a new layer, change it name to glow, and change its very unfortunate yellow color to something more contrasting with something very bright. Burgundy will work fine. Okay, now I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, and I'm going to draw a perfect circle in here. And this very bright color will work great. So I'm going to grab it here and add it to my gradient. I'll change it to radial and make sure that this blue color is on the outside. And then I'll reduce its opacity to 0 and move this diamond shape indicator about here. And now it's a matter of your preference how many of those glowing circles you'd like to stack one on top of another. So with this circle selected, I'm going to grab my scale tool and I'll scale it about something like this. Now I'm going to start scaling copies. And an easy way to do that is just to hold Alt as you scale. So I'm scaling numerous copies of my circle, and they start to look something about this. Now this happens to be a little bit too intense on the outside, so I'm going to select all of them and move this annotator to about here. Yeah, this worked great. Of course, I can always change its size or the ratio of all those objects, and you can settle at a point where you like the effect. So let me take a look at my whole icon, and it looks pretty much okay. Okay, I hope you learned a couple of useful techniques from this tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching, and bye bye.